All right. Well, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all today to the panel on Changemakers and Materials Innovation. I'm Karen Pearson. I chair the Department of Science and Math as well as the sustainability effort here at FIT. And as a materials scientist and somebody who has worked in STEAM education for the whole time, I am so excited to do this. I think before we get started, I would really like to pass it and have all of you kind of give a brief introduction and talk about where and how you ended up working in this space. Suzanne, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Thanks, Karen, and thank you for the invitation to join such illustrious company. I'm excited for the conversation today. Well, my background is I'm a fashion designer by training. I don't have any science background, but I came to science about almost 20 years ago through just what was then a serendipitous encounter with a biologist. And at the time, I was writing a book about the future of fashion. And I felt very strongly that it was going to be scientists working in labs that might be able to kind of give me a sense of what fashion might look like in 10 years or 50 years time, more than fashion designers. And so this biologist, David, that I met said to me, there was this amazing provocation, which was, well, if we're thinking about materials rather than thinking about materials that come from animals or plants that grow in fields, we could think about living organisms like microbes. And that led me to this idea that we might be able to grow a dress in a vat of liquid. And so we actually started a collaboration back then in the UK. And that was my first sort of encounter of design and science coming together. And that project was called Biofabricate. And it really sort of led me on the sort of second half of my career, which moved away from being part of the problem as a designer in the fashion industry towards being hopefully on the side of the solution, which is like, how do we actually partner up with material scientists, with synthetic biologists to rethink our materials? And so post Bioculture, I came to New York. I joined a startup looking to produce materials that were not from animals, but materials like leather. And how could we grow them in a lab environment? And that also was at the time when I founded Biofabricate. So Biofabricate really was formed out of a need to make more interactions like I had in a random way, actually more intentional. So Biofabricate started as an annual summit to bring together designers and brands with scientists and investors, so that we could start to really grow material innovation, but with a very, very much a focus on biomaterial and using the new tools of biotechnology. So that's kind of almost up to date with me. And probably the most recent news is our sort of partnership with Cyrill and Parley for the Oceans, which has been something that has been growing ever closer together. So as Cyrill's come at the sort of, moving away from plastics, and we've been kind of really exploring biomaterials, the two really kind of come together.
Excellent, thank you. I know it's been, we had former students who were part of a team called AlgaeKnit who collaborated with you and actually spoke at the very first Biofabricate conference and event. And they're, part of what I love to celebrate, of that true intersection of where scientists can become designers and designers can become scientists, and business leaders can help us work in that space intersectionally. And so I think that's a really exciting story. And I love to hear more about the future intersections and collaborations across these spaces, and really the use of biomimicry and inspiration from nature, not just use of microbes in there to look at problem solving. So thank you. Borre, would you like to go next?
But yeah, no, I can definitely do a short summit of how we got here. First of all, thank you for the invitation. Amazing, Cyrill and Karen, and it's amazing to be here with Susan. I was just, when I saw it, I was like, oh, I remembered the first presentation you did on that when I was like on a stage in England, I think. So that was very nice to have a sort of flashback. But the road towards where we came, I think, is a nice link. Personally, I am a designer by trade, material and product. Always focused on tactility, and personally really got inspired by understanding product, then seeing that actually every good product is made from an amazing and good material. So that it really started there. So from my studies, I got introduced by how to make the base materials. And when I came into the textile industry and was next to the machines, I understood that it was not the machine that was making what I told the machine, but it was a dialogue. It was very much a sort of getting to learn each other, getting to see what comes out of it, and that was all part of the exploration, and that was not just ordering textile or something that was already made. I started rewriting the software for the machines because I saw a lot of potential of getting my ideas of the final product already in the production process. Because I just literally didn't understand why people would buy a base material off the shelf and then started to redo it and adding things on top of it that you actually cannot already achieve in the production process. So, so that was my first step personally. I translated that into a lot of one-offs, and that went from more wearable technology, textile as the next platform. But I realized very soon that one-offs are not the ones that, or you cannot change the industry with the one-offs. So I really looked at how could I get all the cores of those one-offs, and that was all textile together. And then we started Byborre like 6 years ago. And I realized that I needed to create the best textile, I needed to control the full supply chain and understand what happened from the fiber until the final product. And when I looked at it and I went into that supply chains and started traveling, everybody started with the fabric and it just got handed over with the fiber, and it got handed over from silo to silo to silo until it came to the designers that made a product with it, where I again didn't understand, because actually the designers understood what they wanted to make, for who they wanted to make it, how much they wanted to make, which functionality it needed to have. And all these questions actually for me had impact on the first step. And those steps were all made already. So we started to build the supply chain in small in Amsterdam, getting the machines, getting the R&D project started with the machine manufacturers, understanding how the software goes, doing the same with all the base materials with the yarn suppliers, and actually creating the perfect supply chain for our own design vision. And then Byborre started to doing textiles, and to showcase what we could do, we started a label, and that label came laying in top boutiques in the world, mostly in Japan, now a lot in the States. But it was a showcase for us to show how we could make textile. But the supply chain was for me the most important. And within that supply chain, we saw like, hey, how can we let the people within that supply chain from the yarn and the machines actually talk better to each other? How can designers translate their ideas towards the engineers? So we started making software that actually helped that communication, that translated those steps to make it easier for ourselves. That we did from pixel to needle, we called it. So it was literally like to explain actually, of to do not have to explain the engineers what the design meant, and the other way around, because there was a lot of miscommunication. But this is possible within these boundaries. You can design, hey, and this is design that came out of it. So we created actually the perfect setting for ourselves, where we had R&D relationships with the yarn supplier, with the machine supplier, had our own software for the designers so that they could answer all the questions when they started. What is the functionality? How much do I want to make? And that all within a design process. So at that point, we said like, hey, actually we have a perfect ecosystem to be able to answer those questions, to be very responsible about these questions, to really trigger like, okay, but if we're using the fibers, why are we using, where does it come from? How can we be transparent? How can we be responsible? And then we actually also said, look, well, but it's not the goal to build the next super brand or to scale that up. It was more a solution for us. And then it was very logic for us, well, this is something we need to share. If you have a good solution to link all these steps together, then it will also be a good solution for other creators. And that was actually the moment that we said, like, how can we transfer that in overarching software where all our the whole network and sort of the whole ecosystem comes together and gets a stage, because now the supply chain is closed doors, and behind closed doors you never know what happens. So then we created Byborre Create, the software that we actually launched in beta this last year, like a bit quicker because nobody could travel. And we said like, well, we do everything in-house, and actually you can use the software, you don't have to travel. You can just develop with all the responsible and sourced building blocks already. And then we started opening that up for all the brands. So we work for interior, automotive, sportswear, haute couture. But most of all, it is not only about the creators becoming more conscious creators, making sure that they ask the right questions, but it's also making the whole supply chain transparent, showing all the ingredient brands and partners, so the machine manufacturers, the yarn suppliers, the finishings, all on the same stage as the factories that produce the textiles, but also as the brands that are showing it, to make an honest assessment. Because there were amazingly big brands that did the most sustainable solutions, or they were really sustainable, but they kept them for themselves. And that was very strange, I thought. It's like, oh, you're making a sustainable solution and then you IP it to not share it to the world. Well, then it's a contradiction for me. So for us, it was like, well, let's share those solutions, let other brands also use it, and give the supply chain a stage. And that was also how actually Cyrill and I also got in contact. Like, hey, well, you have an amazing yarn, you have an amazing concept, where now the Parley yarn was the first, and a lot of other ones coming. How could we show them on our platform so that also other brands could use it? But not only, oh, I have a nice yarn, but how can that translate into your personal textile and fit to purpose at the right scale in the right settings? And I think when we had that whole system, one of the biggest problems that I encountered always was just minimums. And the minimums was always due to that the factory said like, well, we can only do the R&D for you if you do a minimum of 5,000 meters, where that is for no small brand available. Then you can only talk to the big brands, and that's also where all the overproduction happens. So when we changed that whole supply chain and finished all those steps, now we deliver the perfect setting. So the settings of the machines, the design, the yarn orders, and the fit to purpose design for the end product to the factory that just makes the skill that they need to make, and they don't have to do R&D. So suddenly the minimums went to 250 meters, so that it became very shareable and very accessible for all creators in their categories that are leading, to really show like, hey, we can make the next step. And I think that is also where we now have the ability to introduce smaller yarns and materials that are actually not at the scale yet to do thousands and thousands of meters for the smaller brands. So I think that's a sort of a summary of where we are at now and how we went from really sort of textile innovation to how can impact lead innovation, and how can we make that as open source as possible and as transparent as possible.
I love that. That's many things I'll wish to follow up on, especially relating to how you actually restructured kind of the coding of much of this process, which I think is a really exciting component in that conversation. But before I ask any possible follow-up questions, Cyrill, could you talk a little bit about your background and also about the work that Parley for the Oceans is doing and has really been a champion for?
Thank you, Karen. Yeah, I left school when I was 18, when I was legally allowed to leave school, and became an entrepreneur with a rent Xerox machine of the copy shop around the corner. And then it led to a creative career where I then relatively quickly found my way into first starting my own little brand, which was about snowboards, and then being picked up by the creative industry and becoming really fast and young creative director on brands like Adidas or Levi's for design firms in Europe. And that was a very traditional, then it was a real traditional career, like working more as in like first freelance team, then specialized design firm on invention or redesign of existing brands, product innovation, and launch of new brands, which was taking until I think 2008 when the finance crisis hit. And then I felt like, hey, this is the moment I should actually leave this work. You know, it's like I can't kind of grow up children for others and then they take them away the moment when they're like adults. And that's how I felt when I developed these brands, you know, or changed brands. You're never really in control as a creative. And so I kind of started a lot of things. I started partnering with universities and really looking into the future, looking into how can we drive the future? What is tomorrow and how can we get there as fast as possible? And in 2012, I met a guy, Captain Paul Watson of Sea Shepherd, through mutual friends. And he was arrested actually in Germany and in prison in Germany. And I was visiting in Europe and for actually the Art Basel in Switzerland. And yeah, a friend told me to meet him and probably help him. So I ended up in this little law firm in Frankfurt, June 16 in 2012. And there was this pirate version of a Santa Claus sitting in front of me, a legend really. I knew him from television. And I was asking him like, hey, Paul, what is the deal with the oceans? What's happening out there? And he told me that the oceans would die pretty much 36 years out latest. That's what the studies would, the research, the science would indicate. And our generation would leave behind a Dead Sea. And that was a shock for me. I thought he must be a drama queen. He's making this up to kind of like raise awareness for the topic. So I went to the bathroom and Googled it. And it was all there, like all the scientific evidence, all the studies that you needed, the United Nations even saying out loud, you know, the oceans are dying. And I went back into the room and became an environmentalist, which is interesting because I grew up in the south of Germany, which is extremely eco, you know, like brutally eco. You have no idea. If you drive with the car to the city, they would stop you and nearly pull you out because it's like a sin there, like to burn fossil fuel. And I grew up like that, you know, and there's something inbuilt in me where I was taught that you have to protect the environment. But then the rebellism came. Like I was like feeling, hey, what are they talking about? We're going to destroy this planet anyways, you know. So my whole youth and my first part of my career was like dominated by that thought that there's no way around people being too stupid, you know, like destroying and eating up this planet. I was very cynical, and I saw no logical answer to that. I was just so clear. People are selfish. They only think about their own careers, their money, their well-being. So of course they're eating everything up. And but I also felt that I'm not doing what I should do. I think that was something that stayed with me my whole career. It's like somebody gave you these gifts. You know, you are able to understand complexity, simplify complex problems. You're able to communicate. You're able to innovate. You're able to excite other people to follow an idea that actually is a scary one for them because it takes them out of their comfort zone. And that's what I've done in my whole career, you know, like it was always about like finding this ultimate border of excellence by questioning the status quo. And therefore, what Borre was just saying sounds very familiar. If you don't know your materials, if you don't know your production methods, if you don't dive deep in how things are being made and what people think the frontiers are, the roadblocks are, how can you be a good designer? It's like it's as if you want to paint a picture and you don't know your paints. You know, you need to know it. You need to know the ingredients that you choose to be in your toolbox. Yeah, and in 2012, in this little law firm in Frankfurt, I realized that Captain Paul Watson, standing for being the symbol for an environmental movement that was started by Robert Hunter back then and Greenpeace, like shocking people into accepting a reality, mind bombs, what they call it, you know. I realized that this is not working fast enough, even if it looks very efficient and in some ways controversial and nearly brutal, you know, because these people put themselves into the front line, expose themselves to danger in order to protect life and in order to kind of raise awareness for these animals. And that's heroes, really. But I also realized that it's not entering the organizations. It's not solving the problems from within. It's creating pressure from outside, yes. But I'm not that guy, you know. I don't like to shame. I don't like to blame. I like to solve problems and I like to design. I like happy ends, you know. I love to sit there and say, whoa, we just solved this problem together. It's amazing. There's nothing more beautiful than a successful collaboration. So I was looking what could be my role here. You know, I saw anger. I saw the environmental movement being siloed into these people that speak bad about each other's, you know. I mean, so many people speak bad about Paul because he's successful or he does things other people don't dare. And the other way around, people speak about this organization, that. And I felt that the environmental movement is scattered, you know, and they're losing time and they're not given the opportunity to really change. And when they would be at a table, then they couldn't offer solutions. They would just repeat what you shouldn't do. And I felt that that could be our role, you know. We could be the glue. We could be an ignition spark for a new generation of environmentalists. And not the ones that point the finger, but ones that own the responsibility and look into the mirror and say, you know what, I am actually that bad guy. I am. I'm driving a car. I'm drinking out of a bottle that has been filled up in another country. I'm polluting the planet. It's me. And I own it because I can own it, because I can change it. I think there is something in a creator, in a designer, in an inventor, when you know that you can change something, you have no problem owning a problem. You just can accept it. You can say, you know what? Yes, this is wrong. This is poor design. This is the wrong ingredient. And that was the starting point, that I felt like Parley could be that collaboration network that brings together people that have skills, extraordinary skills, that they're able to see through the facade of seemingly predefined standards, things that you're not allowed to touch. Oh man, plastic is established, don't touch it. The supply chain of a product is established. That's how we do things. Accept it, don't change it. I think that's wrong. You know, somebody invented all these things in the first place. And probably it was one person, one woman, one man, probably even a child, who knows? You know, somebody came up and said, the way we're weaving things, that could work for a computer, you know, or something like that. I mean, technology is like that, innovation is like that. It doesn't come from only the places that are defined as trust seals by society, you know. I believe in the total outlaws coming up with solutions. And I wanted to give that mindset a home. And that was the beginning of Parley. And at the start, we felt like this is enough. If people learn what I learned in that conversation, a 3-hour conversation I had with Captain Paul Watson back then in June, if I expose other people to that, then they would come to the same conclusion. They would just do everything they can to protect the planet. And the oceans and the survival of our own species, depending on healthy oceans, would make it to the front pages of news. And it would become a movement. People would go to the streets. You know, that's what I felt. But it didn't happen that way. We had these beautiful and amazing social events, like high caliber people, you know, that could change most of the problems themselves, you know, because they are rich or influential or they have knowledge. And yeah, we just became the social event for them. where they felt something, they were sad for a moment, then they went out to the next sushi restaurant. So I realized after the first Parley talks that we organized that we have to kind of take this problem on in a different way and develop a strategy. And we came up with Parley Air, avoid, intercept, and redesign. And we decided back then that we're going to go against plastic crisis, the climate crisis, and the fishing crisis, but we're going to do it carefully. We're going to not speak about what we're doing in fishing, illegal fishing and overfishing. We're going to not speak what we're doing in carbon and climate. We actually kind of shelved that because it looked very complex. We're going to focus on plastic because not so many players were in that game. And we felt that plastic could be an entry, a gateway really for a broad audience to enter the movement, the environmental movement, because we felt that this can't be exclusive. Everybody has to stand up really. And then also we wanted to find a positive twist on everything. And we looked at marine plastic pollution. We looked at all these beaches. We looked at all these bellies of birds or mammals full of that stuff, plastic items that you know from your refrigerator. And we started campaigning about that. And we created something what we called and trademarked even as ocean plastic. And we trademarked it because of one reason. We said, if we don't trademark it and everybody will use it and they will just pretend they're doing the right thing. And we intended back then to say, we're going to give you a material if you're committing to our strategy. We're not giving you material to look good for a moment. We wanted you to actually commit to change your company. And it took us 2 years to find the first partner because we were too intense. We come with a new material that was considered dead and not interesting because nobody was interested in recycling back then. Something that would create extra effort, cost more money. And people laughed at me, to be honest, a lot. And it took us 2 years to convince Adidas to become our first partner. Nobody was laughing then anymore. So we launched the idea of ocean plastic in shoes. And Adidas became this ram to open up the vault, open up the iron door to a collective awareness, more or less, and then what happened. I mean, it became a trend and people started following, and now you find ocean plastic everywhere. We never sued anybody, even if we have a trademark, because technically we're happy. We're happy it became a trend. We're happy if people copy us. I'm happy if they even take our quotes and use them as their own. I don't care. We want to change things as fast as we can because the time is really running up, and it's not 2048 and the oceans will die. The oceans are dying now already in rapid speed. We're in the 6th mass extinction event. That means every day species are leaving this planet forever. And so we are like all about racing against the time, and we are about what we call a material revolution, where we question the status quo. And what we started with plastic is going in other territories, like how can we deal with the climate crisis? How can we deal with the fishing crisis? How can we survive? Through innovation, through creativity, through collaboration. That's my story. And today, that's also why I suggested them are 2 very important collaborators of ours, And Borre, you're really in the intersection between the past and the future because you're representing supply chains. And people might think you're a small company, but the truth is, that's not true. You have a keychain full of keys that open doors to other big supply chain partners. Because what you're doing is the engine room of the industry. You're defining, you're coding, you're programming, you're developing codes that can run on these machines. That means it makes you extremely powerful, makes you big, because you can do all the R&D work that these companies won't do because the machine downtime would be too expensive. So we consider this partnership with you more than a capsule collection. We consider it as an ongoing R&D process that has the application and the realities of application as a mirror hanging there all the time, knowing exactly what we're doing. Not only having wild ideas of a future, but actually knowing what we can do with these wild ideas and how they fit into an implementation. While Suzanne is more representing the real wild future aspect of things, a future that is in collaboration with nature, and representing this community of biofabrication or biomaterials. Means growing things, looking at nature and identifying these little factories, these little creators that actually make all these things that we're consuming so honestly, so unconsciously. If we are chopping down a beautiful tree, if we are killing an animal for its fur or its meat, We actually technically wouldn't have to do that if we would really understand science behind it. If we would understand who's growing the meat, who's growing the hair, who's growing the teeth, the bones, who's growing islands, what are these corals really doing? What is yeast doing? What is mycelium doing? What's algae doing? What are all these like factories of the past that had millions and millions of years of research and development? That these old technologies are actually the future because we still didn't unlock them. And that speaks totally against the ignorance that we had and the arrogance where we said, oh, we humans improve nature because we make things look like a television or some plastic molded object. We haven't seen that in nature, so we think we are better. The truth is that nobody has been able to copy the packaging of nature, for example. Who has really copied a coconut or the skin of an apple or the skin of a banana in the same perfection as nature designed it, I think the true high tech is there, and that's why Suzanne represents for me a very important link into the future of materials. Because these toxic materials that we were using in the past, they're dated. We can't afford them anymore. We have to let them go. And that's what we call the material revolution. Thank you.
I think hearing from all of you was so exciting in just your brief introductions to talk about how you got to where you are. To me, you actually all are representing different spaces in disruptive design processes and pathways. And by doing that, you're also offering new pathways to the future. So as we kind of change to a little bit more discussion based in it, you all really highlighted different challenges, different approaches that are solutions, and you also all spoke to the importance of collaboration and partnership. I would love if you shared or talked a little bit more about how you're using this vision, not just to be from where you are today, but how you think about using those to move 5, 10, 15, or 20 years in the future. I don't know who wants to take that one first. I personally think it is about using materials, as Cyrill kind of mentioned, in understanding factories that inspire us from nature, that also provide pathways that don't end up creating garbage patches or are in fact biodegradable or have a much more complete life cycle. So I would love to pass it to Suzanne first, but somebody else can jump in if they would like.
I'm happy to take a first pass, Karen. I think it's a critical point, which is that I think when fashion looks at sustainability today, we have such high expectations of material innovation. We've been programmed through the 20th century to expect a certain level of functionality, aesthetic, price, access, speed and volume of materials that we are now applying to the new generation of material innovators. So we're not just expecting materials that are either as good as what we already have. In a lot of instances, we have even higher expectations. So we want bio-innovation, but we want it to come with improved or enhanced capabilities. And that may be on a performance or an aesthetic level, but it may also be an expectation that it will have a much better end of life scenario. So, certainly in the biomaterial space, this idea that, well, if it's bio, it should biodegrade or it should be compostable, that's actually a super complex equation. And I think that's where collaboration, and to Cyrill's point around, really trying to unlock the kind of building blocks of nature. When we think about the kind of, like a really circular system, which is nutritious and healthy for us and the planet, I think you only get there by actually re-examining the material system right from the raw material source through to the end of a product's life, and how can that either exist within a system which is circular and can be recycled in some way, or can be returned to the planet in a way which is nutritious. And that's where it's now opening up additional fields of, for example, synthetic biology, where actually we can design and engineer the organisms of life itself to produce what we need in a way which is symbiotic with the planet. So I think that the opportunity for collaboration goes beyond the existing established traditional supply chains, and bioinnovation as a whole field opens up a new way of kind of approaching the material problems, so that we can actually think about who else would we bring into this collaborative mix. And I think, both myself and then, you mentioned Alginate and a whole generation of young innovators who are coming from design. This has never really happened before, where designers are actually there at the inception of material innovation, wanting to be, part of the, the thinking around what it is that we're trying to manufacture, and laying out some of the challenges from the beginning. We want it to have all of these dimensions of performance, functionality, and aesthetics and sustainability. But how can we actually collaborate to ensure that the materials that we are now developing are going to meet our needs around sustainability, and actually having a result which is a healthy planet at the end of it. So I think that we're seeing a broader community of collaborators than we've ever had before. It's no longer the remit just of scientists somewhere remotely over there doing their thing. I think the successful material collaborations that we're starting to see come to market are a hybrid of innovation, where we're seeing design and science working in partnership.
I would agree with that. I think it's an entirely different landscape that you're seeing with students when they come to university. They're actually coming with, for lack of a better word, almost the demand for this intersectional opportunity to study in different spaces. They don't want to be quite as siloed as we once kind of imagined this discussion. I think about when I was kind of a rebel in college and asked a lot of these questions. I was really fortunate to be in a position where I was at a school where we had a lot of opportunity to challenge the status quo. But I think now you're really seeing a quest from many more students. I see it at FIT. I see it when I talk to our students. I see it when I talk to our prospective students. And I think it's really an exciting space for these materials and for how we think about both making them and what they are and how they work. So yeah. Borre, do you want to talk a little bit about maybe the supply chain importance in some of this? I really want to kind of bounce, in an effort to be a little mindful of time, to kind of bounce to what I told you was going to be my third question in that space, which is something our students ask us a lot, which you highlighted earlier, which is in biomaterials, they always often ask us how these materials can get to market and become the standard, how they can go from something that we hypothetically talk about or model and consider to something that is a reality and becomes kind of, for lack of a better word, the production norm, and maybe even doesn't have a price tag that makes it inaccessible to the majority of the population.
Well, I think this is a very logic question, and it's also a very logic sort of that a lot of students have that feeling. It's like, well, it's there. Why can we not just use it, even at smaller scale? And until you just like look at it and then look backwards, and you see the gigantic monster that is built, where everybody is relying on, and there are questions asked, but in the end, I think there is not enough understanding of the transparency. So one of the things that I love on the story of Suzanne is also like there are so many different amazing solutions out there, and that diversity is needed because there's also a lot of different problems out there, and there is not one solution for all these problems or for all the products. Like, of course, it's one like that we have all start to have an understanding what the impact is of what we use. That is one. But what I always saw was, I think what Cyrill mentioned too, is I don't want to point fingers. I want to come with a solution. Like, we can all point fingers all day and say like, well, you have to do it like that, or maybe you should use this. But it's how can we create an ecosystem and a supply chain where that diversity has gets access to. So I think there were a few amazing solutions that we thought of as humans, and they grow by themselves. You can use them, actually circular, and where they were taken, they needed to grow. The only thing is we started scaling these things up at places where they didn't need to grow, where they took everything from the soil. So we started not looking at that diversity. And I think what I've been trying to do, and what with Borre we have been trying to do, is first look at, well, what is the demand of all the brands? What are they actually, what do they need? Because they cannot not all designers have the ability to look back into the supply chain and use things from the fiber, because they don't have the time, the system is not there anymore. Like, there's all solutions that are, or all problems that are right in front of their eyes before they can look at the solution. So when we started peeling that onion and we got their own solution, we started saying like, hey, but how can we just, for every problem, give a first set of solutions that within their timeline, they actually can ask these questions and they're helped, and there are preset solutions for it. So actually, okay, who are you designing for? Why are you making? What is the functionality you need? What is the real amount you need? And then we will take care of the production and look back. That is not our supply chain. It's we are giving you direction to all the factories and the specialists out there. These are their names. These are their locations. And where you need to produce, you can do it on proximity so that we don't have to fly it. And I think changing that system, literally switching it around, like to ask that question, will open up also room for small innovations that are locally there. Because, for instance, like Parley for the oceans, we can now supply to people that need it and that are willing to put in the effort, and do that on small scale numbers. But you see now that we could also give the creative freedom for people for brands to put in their own DNA on scale. So for them, it's exactly in the same realm. We're not saying this you do bad, you have to do it this way. It's like, you need this, we can supply it on scale, but if you have all the consequences, you could also do it more responsible. This is another solution. Oh, you need that functionality? Well, yes, you can choose organic cotton, but you can also choose X, Y, Z. So it is all about creating the platform and the opportunity to have different solutions next to that. So that also, like Suzanne has all these developments that maybe in the beginning only have 200 kilos, could be on the platform where big brands are shopping for their big orders, but also saying like, oh, wait, we would like to try it. And if it's all in the system and the whole setup is done where the yarns are tested, where the factories are running, the prices don't go up that bad. Of course, the base material is a bit more expensive, but the whole supply chain is ready to be used. The whole R&D is done. So actually you create a fertile ground for diversity in materials. And the moment that you do that and you give material passports to the final products, actually end consumers can see, well, this comes locally, so I want it because that product that I see at one of the big firms doesn't say where it comes from, doesn't say who is making it. Actually, they're lying about who's making it. So I think it's a two-way thing. On the one hand, it's the educate and show the whole supply chain so that you cannot have spotlight marketing. Like, oh, we do this very well. The rest we don't talk about because it has closed doors. And that all those questions are asked. And on the other side, you give the creators the chance to make responsible decisions along the way within the time frames they are bound to. Because in the end, there are thousands of brands and they all have their egos and they all want to produce. But if you ask them the right questions and you're putting up the mirrors and you let to have an okay decision next to it in the same time frame, suddenly they will feel the pressure. And they will also say like, well, but that was very good for marketing. Well, this is an honest story. And I think there is a sort of that balance. And that was also why I'm not scared of working with the biggest brands in the world that want thousands of kilometers, because that's exactly where the biggest problem is. We cannot have a solution and one student with the best idea in theory. We have to have that solution on the same platform as the giant people that are fucking it up, because then they have the same voice. They have the same voice. And at that point, when you're like have the same voice and you give the stage to a solution, then those giants have to invest because they cannot hide anymore. And I think there's a sort of where
right. They lose their ability to have what they've been doing be for the only option from, for lack of a better word, a financial perspective. They lose that platform very quickly.
But they cannot say anymore, you don't know it because you're not running the supply chain. No, the supply chain is open. Like, it's transparent. It doesn't matter if you're big or small. It's not about those connections, because actually the connections we should open up, because then locally you can find all the best connections. Now nobody want to share factories, where that actually, if it's open, quality goes up. That's a fact.
Right. Transparency really feeds, I think, a much different pathway forward. So I think that's really
responsibility.
Exciting.
It feeds responsibility.
Absolutely. It feeds accountability.
And innovation.
Definitely innovation. And I actually want to pass it back quickly to you, and then we're going to invite a couple of our participants to ask a few other questions. But you talked earlier, Cyrill, about the importance of, okay, wow, science modeling has really shown us and highlighted things we cannot run away from. We cannot hide from any number of environmental effects. And you gave a little bit about your story there. But I wanted to know if you could talk a little bit more about offering solutions in that space. Really where you understand what choice you're making, but also understand how to start being part of the solution to these big problems.
Yeah, of course. So first of all, I want to add to what Suzanne and also Borre just said by highlighting really one aspect. Innovation is not a light switch. It's not like old, new, and then the new is perfect and the old is the old. And that's not what it is. It's a process of pivoting. And I think everybody who says, oh, I'm doing a perfect solution, oh my God, my advice is the best, this is the ideal solution for this problem, is not real. This person is not real. Because in an innovation process, you're making mistakes, you're testing things out, it's an ongoing back and forth. And even the ambition to say, oh, we're not only doing a project that is perfect, and oh my God, we can't even fly there anymore, now we have to take a sailboat. And actually you end up saying, you know what, why would we even do that project? And you can take that purist approach, and then you're going to live in the forest, and you're going to definitely be able to survive there, and probably you'll learn a lot, but it's not a lifestyle that billions of other people will follow you with. So here's the truth. You can go totally extreme, and you should. We need to support totally extreme solutions. And we need to support the purest of all ambitions, knowing that these are often experiments. And knowing that the reality today is very far away from it. So we are operating between two poles. The purest of the purest, idealistic, utopian and everything. and the most toxic and sinful that we are using today. And somewhere in between is the truth. And by seeking for the best we can do, by having big visions and big dreams, we're driving the status quo of today into tomorrow. And therefore, it's absolutely right. We probably don't change things today by putting ocean plastic into the supply chain. We're still catering to an old supply chain, but we are ending the use of virgin plastic. We are more or less kissing a flag and saying, oh, we don't want to use your material anymore. Don't make more of it. You already made enough for the next 1,000 years to come. We're going to use all that stuff that is out there. Is ocean plastic better than plastic? No. But removing it from the environment is, and stopping the production of new is. But the most important piece is to hiss that flag and to say, we want out. We don't want this material. We want something new. And the option here is to say, we're doing that in the open. We're putting now a material into the supply chain that is meant to self-destruct at some point. It will be phased out. This is the last chapter of plastic because recycling has no future. It costs too much money, has too much leakage, and why would we recycle a material that is toxic in the first place? But the new materials take time. And if you have 200 kilograms, then you are already an amazing master inventor that has a fully commercialized biofabrication supply chain. Most of the people I know, they can barely put enough material together that we can make one pair of shoes. So this is the process. We are sitting in the old, we are sitting in the aftermath of old and toxic technologies. We're looking into the future, seeking for the new. We don't know what the new really is. We don't know what the feedstock really is for these new materials. We don't want to money culture the whole planet just to have corn to grow a new form of a plastic that has other side effects. So we have to think it through. We don't want to create a new monster. That means while we are developing the future and being highly professional, enthusiastically skeptic about it, we have to kind of more or less prepare the runway for it. And that means we have to hiss the flag against the past, win time, create demand, and not only with consumers, but also with investors, with lawmakers, with the supply chain partners. Because at the end of the day, it's not the brands who are making these products. It's not the companies most of the companies have definitely not a deep insight into the supply chain. It's a global supply chain industry that makes products for everybody, especially with companies at scale. So we have to prepare all these people and lead them towards the new and de-risk it. And de-risking means prototyping. De-risking means testing. De-risking means to work in environments like a Byborre and say, listen, we're doing all taking the hits here, we're developing something, and it can run on your machines later. So you don't have downtimes. You don't need your R&D department. You're saving money. And also showing, and that's the most important piece for me, the fascination, creating fascination for new materials. That people say, oh my God, I want this. Because we're pretending that the materials we made in the past are so perfect, and now we're trying to find alternatives that match these criteria. The truth is, who says that? Who says that a jacket that sits in my wardrobe is perfect? Why doesn't it feel the way my skin feels? Why doesn't it read out that I'm thirsty and I should probably take my meds because my headache is killing me? Why is that third skin not intelligent as my first one? And I think there is so much in nature that we can unlock. There is so much knowledge, so much science, and we will not find out by killing animals and just chopping everything down. We find out by collaborating, by finding these, by looking closer, examining and exploring and really understanding and leaving away this ignorance that we are so proud of, That's what I think. So it's a process, but it's not a process of extremes. It's a process of pivoting, and it's not a process where we condemn the past. No, we're celebrating the future. That's different. We're celebrating the future, and we're celebrating our human ability to adapt, to invent our way out of a mess, to survive. Because deep in us, we are just master champions of survival, and we have proven that. From scratching the core of a bone to becoming the #1 uber predator on planet Earth. And now it's time to take that axe away and just start doing it in a different way. And I think we are this generation that is opening the door, but the next generation will do it natively. And that's what I believe in.
I think that's excellent. I think those are all really exciting ways to kind of consider our pathways forward. I want to introduce you here to Professor Ajoy Sakar, who is actually in the textile development and marketing department and a longtime researcher in much of this space as it relates to the textile industry. And he has a few questions, and then I'll invite you all to make any kind of final thoughts. And thank you for your participation in this. So Ajoy.
Thank you very much. That was very, very interesting. My question to all three of you is, as teachers, as Karen and I are teachers, and I would like your opinion of how we design the curriculum of the future. So for students studying fashion design, fashion business, textiles, what would you like for students to know, to learn as they prepare to join the industry of the future, as you, whether it's biofabrication, whether it's software, whether it's working with recycled materials. So what would you like our students to know and prepare themselves in the next 4 or 5 years as they venture to enter this exciting industry? Thank you.
I have a lot of thoughts on curriculum, Ajoy, but so it's a great question, and it's fantastic to hear that you are wanting to innovate the curriculum for fashion design, because I think it is, in many instances, a sort of dinosaur system. The first thing that I would say is there's been this historic detachment between designers essentially in their ivory towers creating things, and then this whole supply chain that we've been talking about. Never, when I was at college at Central St. Martin's eons ago, was I taken to a textile mill, a dye house, a tannery, somewhere that is producing materials in volume. And this is one of the things that we see with a lot of young material innovators, is that they come straight out of college. They've never seen anything, any part of a supply chain. They've never been to a factory. They have no clue what it actually looks like at scale. They're not aware of the system that they're part of. So my first advice would be, get them out into the world, take them to these places so that they can see the reality, because it's not until that you really kind of see, oh, that's how it all works, that actually the full challenge is exposed to you. So that's the first thing. But I think also you can't enforce everyone to be interested in the same things. But for those who are, our access to facilities needs to change. So, I definitely was schooled in, pattern cutting and sewing and, traditional textile making techniques. But that is very different. When I was doing my research in biomaterials, I wasn't able to do it any longer at Central St. Martin's because there was nowhere to put a fermentation tank. So, for me, that at least meant I had to go out and seek collaborators in other universities that did have access to those kinds of facilities. And I know FIT is slightly different because you are a little bit more on the technical side compared to other design schools. But we need a radical rethink around, if you want fashion and textile designers to be part of material innovation, then we need to redesign the facilities that they work within, so they're exposed to to more lab environments where they can actually be more hands-on with materials. And we should bring material science into the curriculum for those that are interested in following that kind of path. And we should put pressure on brands to fund some of this, because brands are very keen to be the ones to put the first materials in their products. But actually, historically, they've been poor at investing in material innovation, and they've been poor at investing in student and sort of the educational, the academic environment where innovation comes from. So we should hold them accountable and say, if you want more material innovation and more teams like Alginate to emerge out of places like FIT, then come and fund our departments.
Oh, that makes me so happy to hear you speak to these functions, because for years, the fact in many cases, even getting now the government to actually fund initiatives that work towards these components has been something that, as Ajoy knows, I've worked very tirelessly on. But I think the idea that industry actually plays a real role in how we support our educational institutions to provide these opportunities to students is a real key component in this space. And the reason I say that is otherwise, for lack of a better word, in many cases, the pace at which academia can move is too slow to meet the challenges that we discussed here today. We need to have a vastly different initiative and funding source to move ourselves at a speed that actually keeps up with the rate and pace of our global challenges at this point, or allows us to catch up. Maybe we have to catch up.
And it shouldn't be that all the funding goes to, the same, all the same, the same sources, right? MIT is amazing, but it shouldn't attract all the funding. When you have successful teams like Alginate come out of FIT, that should attract funding to you as well, right? We need a more global support system for education, because there are incredible designers around the world, but they have very different kinds of access to facilities and teaching. I definitely feel like we need to share the resources a bit better than we're currently doing.
And then there is collaboration. I think that if you want to be a good designer, you have to be a good collaborator, actually a collaboration enabler. And I think the really good artists show that. When you look at Doug Aitken or even James Turrell or like top dog artists, they could never ever bring their art to life if they wouldn't be able to excite all the experts to doing so. In the exchange with experts, be it in a supply chain, be it in the broad variety of technology, but even special knowledge in color or even psychology, neurology or whatever, all these different aspects that are around humans, to study them and to be good in collaborating with people who know, excite them, and don't be the ignorant and the arrogant. Oh, I'm a designer. No, be humble. You need everybody else to actually bring your design to life. We are more orchestrating than we are actually creating ourselves. We're orchestrating, we're curating. And yes, at a certain point, we put our ego in front, which is needed urgently to ram it through the wall. But the truth is, behind that, we need to be open. We need to kind of learn and know then where to find whom to ask in this moment where you need it, because a designer never has time. A designer is always under pressure. That means if you don't have that network behind you in which you can always tap into, if you didn't invest into building these relationships, then you're alone in the moment when you need support.
I think that's very well said. I think what I think the main problem is, loose from that, I think a curriculum is always built on the past, and the moment that you're in it, it's already past. But all the design schools that I've been at FIT for a while, but also in Europe, and even now that we are helping design schools to look at the future, they all have the idea that it is about a competitive environment. Oh, we're such a competitive environment, and oh no, you have to be the best, and the same, that all translates through to brands. You have to be competitive. Oh, if you work for this brand, then you cannot. I had this conversation so many times that brands say, well, if you work for them, you cannot work for us. And it's like, good luck. Get your innovation anywhere else. If you can make the same textiles, good luck. And then they come back because they can't. And the whole idea is, it is not about competition, because competition means that one wins. It's so outdated. And I understand that happens in sports because it's an individual competition. and it is a physical thing. And then yes, one can be the best and that was good for your ego, but we're not in sports. We're in like making something better. So if you then think that you all need to run the same thing and one wins and the rest loses, what did you do with all the materials used, with all the knowledge used? So I think that whole competitive environment in schools is something that just needs to be like canceled immediately. It is not about who's the best. It's not about getting your A's. It's about how can you look at each other, exactly what Cyrill says, how can we work together? How can we like even finish school together? How can we, like for me, an algae project is a graduation. Congratulations, and there all the energy needs to go. It's really about thinking about how do we use each other's knowledge. And that's how what the internet became open and DJs became superstars, not because they were all making it, they were planting it together. It's about assembling. And then you have people that can assemble very well, that are designers. And then you have like the more introvert people that can actually think very well. So I think that balance between introvert and extrovert and really helping each other, well, there we can make steps. And I think that's a massive wrong that I always saw at like, hey, who was finished with honor? Who was cum laude? I don't care. Like, it's about who listens and is a team player and helps somebody if he falls down, because that's the next step, and not like runs off because somebody falls down. So I think it's very much in a school environment. How can we change that? And how can we literally say like, well, if you invent something very good, well, share it.
Yeah, because these complex situations that we have to master on all levels, outside or inside the environmental movement, they will not be mastered by one superstar. They will be mastered by groups, and they will be mastered by sometimes hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people collaborating, probably thousands. And that is exactly the point with time, with everything being so fast now, and also being, now I'm going back to the environmental movement, we have to change so fast. We can't put our bets on one person and hope that there is one genius being growing out of billions and billions of people. The genius is the collaboration, the genius is the group. And honestly, the sum of a good team does always more and always achieve more and is always more reliable and safe than one individual that tries to be the one and only excellence. And when you're looking at today's new generation of designers, they are mass collaborators. You know, they are like collaborating all the time. Otherwise, they couldn't even deliver that immense amount of not only product, but also news or content and all these things and appearances. It's just, I'm not saying that this is good. You know, I'm not saying that we have to speed up everything. I'm happy that we are a little slower right now with the pandemic, to be frank. But in general, the complexity of the issues that we are facing today, they will not be mastered by the individuals. They will be mastered by groups.
Thank you. It's excellent advice for our students.
I think that's exactly that message, that idea of collaboration and the value that different perspectives, backgrounds, and specializations really have a lot of power to innovate and solve problems when they work together. So I want to thank you on behalf of FIT and the Sustainability Council for coming together today and sharing in this conversation with us. It's been a real pleasure. I feel like we could go on and have version 2, 3, or 4 on any one of these topics. I've made a number of notes, but I think coming back at a second point at some point to talk a little more about the curriculum and how we actually scale and design some programs for college students, but also how do we change some of our earlier education models so that students really come to college prepared for this, prepared to be collaborators, prepared to think outside the box and to really innovate going forward. So I really thank you for all of this time today. I know we spent a little extra time, and I hope all of you also had
No
as
problem.
much fun as I did listening and thinking about how we might work to solve some of these problems. But as Cyrill nicely mentioned earlier, I really like this idea where we look to solve a problem and offer new solutions, do it with transparent pathways, but don't do it by shaming or forgetting the past, but by embracing that and using it as a vehicle to move forward. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us.
Bye-bye. Good luck with everything.
Good luck. Thanks. I'll send you all emails in your teams.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.